On upper GI endoscopy, after traversing the upper esophageal sphincter, the mediastinum was directly entered where copious amount of pus was visualized. Despite trying a guide wire and then a catheter with contrast, the remnant esophagus could not be visualized. The remnant esophagus was then intubated retrogradely using a thin scope passed via the gastrostomy stoma. The G-tube was initially removed and the thin scope was passed into the stomach, from where the remnant esophagus was intubated in a retrograde manner. The endoscope was then advanced into the mediastinal cavity and from there across the upper esophageal sphincter into the patient's mouth. A guide wire was passed through the scope and pulled out of the patient's mouth, thereby establishing wire access between the oral cavity and the stomach. The length of the circumferentially destroyed esophagus, namely the distance between the upper end of the remnant esophagus to the upper esophageal sphincter, was measured at 5 centimeters. Over the guide wire, 3 fully covered self-expanding metal esophageal stents were deployed in series, overlapping with each other. The lower end of the distal stent was positioned above the lower esophageal sphincter. The middle stent primarily bridged the mediastinal defect, and the proximal stent was deployed across the upper esophageal sphincter into the hypopharynx. The upper end of the proximal stent was precisely positioned at the interarytenoid level so as to avoid interference with the epiglottis while swallowing. Following stent deployment via a left neck incision, extracellular matrix was wrapped around the stents at the site of the esophageal defect. Patient's autologous muscle cells were then co-localized with the extracellular matrix, following which the left neck incision was closed.